Good evening, and right before we dive into the main topic today, I'd like to quickly mention that over on Epictv, our awesome no censorship video platform, I recently published a super spicy two-part series detailing the current state of edible mRNA vaccines, the research behind them, as well as the push to get them into our food supply, which is a lot more advanced than you might realize. Now, even though the content in that two-part series is 100% fact-based, that topic is not exactly welcome here on YouTube, which is exactly why we have Epictv. The link to that edible mRNA vaccine two-part special series, it'll be right there at the very, very top of the description box below. You can just click on that link and head on over to Epictv and watch it right away. Now, getting back to today's main topic. If you happen to need another reason to dislike the IRS, well, the Supreme Court just gave it to you. According to a unanimous decision that just came down from the U.S. Supreme Court, it is now completely legal for the IRS to secretly obtain the bank records of third-party individuals who are not under federal investigation. I repeat, at a time when the liberal wing and the conservative wing of the Supreme Court can't seem to agree on anything, well, in this case, they agreed 9-0 in favor of the IRS. And because of this new ruling, you can be a person who has committed no crime. You're not even suspected of having committed a crime. But if the IRS is trying to collect back taxes from your friend, well, they can still pull your bank records as well. And the best part is that this entire process can play itself out in secret without you ever being informed that the feds have taken access of your bank records. Here's specifically what an analysis of the Supreme Court decision explained. Here's how it explained this new rule. Quote, "The Supreme Court has ruled unanimously that it's lawful for the IRS to secretly obtain the bank records of third parties when collecting on taxes owed. In other words, the nation's highest court recognized that the IRS isn't required to notify third parties who aren't under investigation when seeking a summons for banking records thought to be relevant to the tax delinquency of another person." Now, visually, here's what the new rule looks like in practice. Let's say the IRS is investigating a man named Kevin for possible tax evasion, and they have determined that Kevin owes about $5 million in back taxes. Now, if you happen to know Kevin, Kevin happens to be your friend, and therefore, without telling you, the IRS can now access your banking records in order to supposedly investigate Kevin. And the problem with this whole scenario becomes quite evident when you consider the fact that Kevin doesn't only know you. Kevin has family members, he has other friends, he has neighbors, he has coworkers, he has acquaintances, he has people and companies he's done business with in the past, and so on and so forth, all of whom can now legally have their bank accounts accessed by the feds in secret. In fact, if you really stop for a moment and consider how interconnected the modern world has become, well, it's not a stretch to say that very likely every single person who's watching this episode right now knows at least one individual who happens to be under investigation by the IRS, meaning that in practice, every single person who's watching this episode right now is subject to this type of government intrusion. And just as an aside, if you happen to be a person who's watching this episode, well, I hope you consider smashing those like and subscribe buttons and perhaps leaving a little comment below the video as well in order to tickle the YouTube algorithm and have this episode, as well as this important information, reach ever more people. Now, getting back to this Supreme Court ruling, in terms of the specifics, the case that was in front of the court was called Polsoli versus IRS. And in this particular case, there was a man named Remo Polselli who was under investigation by the IRS for owing about $2 million in back taxes as well as different federal penalties. And while they were investigating him for these tax crimes, the IRS, they secretly obtained the banking records of both Mr. Polselli's wife as well as the bank records of several law firms that Mr. Polselli had previously contracted. Now, eventually, the wife and the law firms discovered this fact, and they filed a lawsuit against the federal government, saying that the IRS went way too far in pursuing their bank records without prior notice. On the flip side, however, the Biden administration said that the IRS does not need to provide any notice to third parties, and that having to do so would give delinquent taxpayers a, quote, head start in hiding assets. And so, after several months of legal back and forth, just a week ago, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously, 9-0, in favor of the IRS. Here's how Chief Justice John Roberts explained the court's rationale in his opinion statement. Quote, "Congress has given the IRS considerable power to go after unpaid taxes. One tool at the service's disposal is the authority to summon people with information concerning a delinquent taxpayer. Accordingly, the IRS may request the production of books, papers, records, or other data from any person who possesses information concerning a delinquent taxpayer." However, he goes on to write, that official notice does not have to be provided if the summons is issued in order to do tax collection work. Here's how Chief Justice John Roberts continues, quote, "In other words, the IRS may issue summonses both to determine whether a taxpayer owes money and later to collect any outstanding liability. When the IRS conducts an investigation for the purpose of determining the liability of a taxpayer, it must provide notice. But once the service has reached the stage of collecting any such liability, which is a distinct activity, notice may not be required." Then, in a concurring opinion, here's how the two justices, Ketanji Brown Jackson and Justice Neil Gorsuch, explained their rationale for also supporting the IRS. Quote, "Congress has recognized that there might be situations, particularly in the collection context, where providing notice could frustrate the IRS's ability to effectively administer the tax laws. For instance, upon receiving notice that the IRS has served the summons, interested persons might move or hide collectible assets, making the agency's collection efforts substantially harder." Now, we here at the Epoch Times, we did reach out to the lawyers for both the U.S. government side as well as the lawyers for Mrs. Polselli, but we have yet to hear back from either one. However, we did hear back from a lawyer that belongs to the Institute for Justice, which is a nonprofit law firm which actually filed an amicus brief in support of Ms. Polselli in this particular case. And here's what they told us this ruling will mean for common Americans like you and me. Quote, "The Supreme Court's ruling grants the IRS startlingly broad authority to pry into the financial records of people who may be only remotely connected to a delinquent taxpayer. That ruling raises serious Fourth Amendment concerns. Thankfully, the court stressed that its ruling was narrowly focused on the statutory question before it. In a future case, the court should address the constitutional limits on the government's power to demand access to people's most sensitive financial information." Meaning, in plain English, that because the issue in this particular case was more of a technical understanding of a very particular IRS rule, well, there might come another case in the near future which could take a more foundational approach, and it could force the U.S. Supreme Court to decide what exactly are the constitutional limits to the IRS. But until that day comes, the reality is that according to this new unanimous decision from the U.S. Supreme Court, your bank records are open books for the IRS, which I can imagine is great news for those 87,000 new IRS agents that the Biden administration is adding to the agency. Without the Supreme Court ruling, maybe those guys wouldn't have enough work to do. But now I'm sure they'll have plenty. Which I imagine is great news for those 87,000 new IRS agents that the Biden administration is adding to the agency. Without the Supreme Court ruling, maybe those guys wouldn't have had enough work to do. But now I'm sure they'll have plenty. Regardless, sorry, is it raining money? Or rather, I should say that this is fake money being printed into oblivion by those geniuses over in Washington, D.C. And so before they completely obliterate your life savings, what I recommend you do is to convert that fake money into real money, which is physical gold and silver. And the best company to use is the sponsor of today's episode, American Hartford Gold, who also happens to be my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, American Hartford Gold is one of the best companies in the game. Besides myself, they have thousands of other 5-star ratings across the country. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They ship quickly, directly to your doorstep. Their product listings are awesome. They're stacked with great options of gold and silver bullion and coins. And best of all, they have amazing customer service. When you pick up the phone and call them, you feel good because not only do they have friendly staff, but they're a patriotic company that actually sponsors a program like ours, so you feel good knowing you support a company that supports the truth getting out into the wider American audience. And so calling them up is a no-brainer. But best of all, if you tell them that Roman sent you, they will throw in up to $5,000 worth of free silver with your first purchase. So giving them a call is a real no-brainer. So hit them up. It's 866-242-2352. That's 866-242-2352, or you can simply text the word Roman, R-O-M-A-N, Roman, to 65532. Roman to 65532. Of course, all their details will be down in the description box below. And now, let's head on back to the studio. Now, if you'd like to go deeper into anything that we discussed in today's episode, including the full PDFs for the majority opinion as well as the different concurring opinions, I'll throw all those down into the description box below this video for you to check out and peruse at your own leisure. And then lastly, as I also mentioned at the very, very top of the episode, if you would like to check out that 2-part series, the one I put together regarding the current state of edible mRNA vaccines, the research behind them, as well as the push to get them into our food supply as fast as possible, well, you can watch it over on Epictv, our no censorship video platform. The link to that 2-part series, it'll be right there at the very, very, very top of the description box below. You can just click on that link and head on over to Epictv and watch it right away. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed. Most importantly, stay free.